And a group foreign investment network hosted a meeting on the threat of COVID-19 on the African economy. The webinar, which held under the theme COVID-19 Economic Threat, How Industries in Africa Can Survive the Shock, had economic experts from all over the world brainstorm on the strategies for building a viable African economy in the face of looming recession. They examined that the impact of lockdown attributed to curbing COVID-19 spread has led to a lot of disruption of transit trade and productivity among African countries. And joining me on the ward now to discuss this is the project coordinator of Foreign Investment Network, Ayeni. Good to have you join us, Ayeni. Now, let's look at the data coming from the World Bank saying that economic growth in Africa would decline by minus 2.1 to about 5.1%. How possible it is for Africa to avoid a major economic hit due to this pandemic?
Thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about this. We have been, as you said, holding a series of web conferences trying to see how best to tackle the situation. We've been talking to a lot of experts on this pandemic, on this crisis, and a lot of things are coming out to the fore now. A few things we understand now is that African Union are not sitting back on this matter. There are a few things they're doing. Based on discussion we had with one of the top officials in AU, we heard that they are now fast tracking the African Free Trade Agreement to make sure that rather than depending on foreign governments, we are now co-depending on each other. You heard about the Madagascar cure that was brought to Nigeria a few days ago for us to look at and see, hey, what can happen on here? Is this something we can use? Then on the economic side, we're fast tracking a number of economic policies. We heard from the Minister for Finance, Equatorial Guinea, on how they've had to sit down to bring out new laws that would help SMEs survive this crisis. How banks needed to start giving out certain loans to SMEs to survive the crisis and to make certain palliatives available. They're also talking about how they're fast-tracking the digital and the cashless policy for Equatorial Guinea. They're saying that fintech technology must now be brought to the fore. Another thing that we see around Africa is that it's brought out the fault lines of various economic areas that we were concentrating on. And we're now seeing that the focus now needs to change to healthcare, agriculture, things that are basic. If we don't have these basic things in place, you can't build any other economic story on top of it. So what's going on now is that we're seeing from the foreign investment, from our FIN perspective, our expertise is in foreign investment, bringing FDI basically. We're seeing that there's a push towards pharmaceutical companies, agriculture, healthcare, and all products and services that are related to these areas. We're now reprioritizing economic areas where we have neglected in the past. We're also seeing a lot of digital disruption, where countries that weren't taking digital transformation into as very important, we're now seeing that digital transformation is now becoming the thing that every country is looking at now. We see how working from home, some countries are trying to make it even a permanent situation. Some banks, these are just from the private sector perspective. Then we see how government officials are able to sit, have meetings without being gathered together in one place, face to face. So we're seeing that the whole physical construct is no longer there, but we're still able to do things from a from a digital perspective. We're seeing the use of technology.
All right, just allow me butt in here because you're raising very key points. But you're talking about the AFCTA, enacting the AFCTA, but a lot of people will say that that would take time to make any significant impact on African economies. But the big economies like Angola, South Africa, and Nigeria are exporters of commodities whose prices have been falling for a really long time now. And for those who are importing goods, we see that their currencies are taking a hard hit against the dollar. So Africa has been dealing a weak hand for a long time, haven't we?
We have, definitely, certainly. As you know, where there's a lot of debt, we're talking about debt rescheduling at the moment. We're also talking about their loans, their IFC, ADB. We're still asking for loans. I know that, but they're also talking about the old loans that we've taken, how they can, what can we do about rescheduling payment, or even debt forgiveness in some cases, and that's been tabled as an African collective, and that's another thing we're talking about. So we don't get hard hit by this situation, because the economic impact, if we're still going to be repaying the loans we're taking, and we're still trying to cushion the economy as it is now, is impossible. We will not survive it. A lot of countries will not survive it. And so this debt rescheduling is going to do us a lot of good. And we're getting some good results in that area. And then we're speaking with one voice. And then we also see that Africa is speaking with one voice. We're now beginning to speak with one voice because we're hit equally in the same way. And then we're seeing that codependency is not becoming something we're looking at. Now, to fast track African free trade, right? We're seeing that there are things that, for agriculture, for instance, what do we need to, how do we need to look in the direction where each country can feed off the other? And that's the discussion that they're having on the table. You heard about the appointment of President Buhari as the COVID-19 palliative committee. Now, and these are part of the things that they're tabling before them. How can we help each other? So these discussions are still ongoing from what we heard from our web series.
All right, so you mentioned debt, and we know that some countries in Africa, even right now, are asking for more loans, for example, Nigeria. But when it comes to the debt we owed even to China, the World Bank, the IMF, should we be asking for moratorium extension, or should we be asking for a blanket forgiveness at this time?
As you know, every time that there's a situation where we've had to ask for debt forgiveness, we usually start from the angle of debt forgiveness. And if that doesn't happen, then we start talking about rescheduling, as we did as Nigeria did with the days of Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala while Obasanjo was president. The first thing was debt forgiveness. Somehow, we were able to get that. But in this case, we're not sure how that's going to work out. But since we're speaking with one voice now, it's very likely that debt forgiveness can be achieved. But that's one thing that we're still talking about. Yes, countries are still asking for loans at the same time, because in the short term, a lot of countries cannot even survive without these loans as it is now.
So let's look at issues around the FDIs you just mentioned. Like you rightly said, FDIs, a lot of countries are not looking at foreign direct investment anymore. Everyone is looking inward. So how can Africa look inward? Just briefly tell us, maybe in like a minute, how can Africa look inward?
Very, very strictly speaking, because we've seen the fault lines. We know the areas where we have not developed capacity in the past. Agriculture, healthcare, these are major areas we've neglected in the past, and they've all come to bite us now. They're all, as we can see. Now, foreign direct investment is going to first look in that direction, and technology, fintech, anything that technology can, you know that there's been a technological disruption from working from home, from all of this period, this lockdown period, where we've had to depend on technology to get things done. Now we're going to start building capacity in that area. You will start seeing how where venture capitalists, business angels, these are the areas that they will be looking at in the next few years. And governments they now know the reality of this thing, and they will do everything, I believe, in their power, because we've learned lessons, the lessons learned that are clear to see that these are the areas that we need to prioritize, and that investment will start to flow in that direction. And that's an advice to most investors in this area. Based on what we do from the Foreign Investment Network, we're seeing how we're being contacted by by known foreign investors to give them reports on the state of pharmaceuticals and healthcare, this sector. And so we know that that is the heartbeat of foreign investment, as it were, at the moment.
Project Coordinator, Foreign Investment Network, Ayeni. Many thanks for talking to TVC News.